Welcome everyone to episode 29 of Ty's Training Talking with My Dad. This is the week of July 28th, 2025. I'm Tyler Andrews, and here as always with my co-host and father and his cat for another look at training and life ahead of Project Himalaya Run Everest. Yep, we are going back to Everest. In case you missed it, we did have a bonus episode a couple weeks ago. You can go check that out, read the whole announcement, listen to it. It's all good. Everything Everest related again this season will be at tylercandrews.com/Everest. So you can check in there for updates in addition to however you are consuming this on YouTube or Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to things. So that's my intro. Mr. C, how are you doing this week? How's Theodosia?
Theodosia is great and such a lovable cat. She seems to know exactly when I'm going to get on a Zoom call and shows right up to show off. And I'm great. We had a lovely week. We had a beautiful time. We were down in Rhode Island on the water yesterday, which was very lovely. So yeah, it's that time of year when it's pretty nice up here. So all good.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. Well, yeah, it's been a big week here. As we'll talk about, I just got off an all-nighter on Cotopaxi volcano like 24 hours ago or so, and that was quite something. We'll talk about that. But yeah, good week overall. Last of the build-up, the totals we had for numbers were 114 kilometers, about 38 hours of training time, and 15,238 meters of uphill vert. So very strong week, a good way to finish out the block. And now it's just a little bit of R&R here. I'm taking a few days of my little block break recovery. So just did a little easy 60 minutes and that'll be all for today.
Okay. Good to have some time off after that.
Yeah, that was a big one.
All right. So so this was the end of your block, which are these 3 or so week chunks in which you divide up your training. So how did this block go? And give us a sense of the overall numbers for this block.
This block went really, really well. I mean, gosh, it's really apples to oranges, or I don't know what the metaphor is, but it was a big step in the right direction from how I was feeling in June. June, as we've talked about a few times, was just kind of a rough month. I kind of tried to rush back into training and didn't feel fantastic. And, you know, this, I think I had that trip to Colorado at the end of June and used that as like a little bit of a reset, and then came back and really got into a super good routine here in keto, and just everything started to feel good. Workouts started to feel better. The easy days started to feel better. The longer days all went well. So it was a really, really good block in that sense of not only just did the workouts go well, but also just looking at the progress of last month as compared to this month was night and day. So I think that was the biggest thing. And then in terms of numbers, I went and looked at it. So it was the overall averages were 17.5 kilometers a day, which is about 125 kilometers a week. So I don't know what that is, like 77 miles. So it's funny, there's really not much mileage because, you know, I mean, when I was running, even marathoning, we were doing 140, 150, even 160 plus miles a week sometimes. So the mileage is definitely not the focus. That's the horizontal difference. But the big thing was the average 16,700 meters of vert per week, which is about 2,400 meters per day. So that's about 8,000 feet a day. And the other big thing was the hours. It was 5.5 hours a day of training average for the last, like, whatever it was, 20 days or something, which is, I think, about 38 hours of training time a week. And, you know, that's like time that my watch is actually running. So that's, you know, running time. It's also strength training, but it's not counting things like, you know, the little things, stretching and PT and stuff like that. So it very much is, well, I guess almost a full-time job, 38.5 hours. I skimped off for that extra hour and a half, but it feels like a full-time job when you factor in everything else.
I think it's more than a full-time job when you consider the amount of calories and energy you're expending, plus you're also not counting, I assume, the planning and all the other stuff that goes on around it. Yeah. Okay. Well, congratulations then. Great
Thanks.
block.
Yeah, it's always good to get through a block. And, you know, we've talked about a couple of times over the last couple of weeks, just trying to be consistent and shooting for those pretty good, but not outstanding days. And I think that's really been the highlight of this block, has been a lot of those just B+, super solid days, nothing outrageous, but just really good stuff.
Good. Okay. So after an easy Monday, after your big workout on Sunday, Tuesday and Wednesday, you were back to pretty strong road crew summit times, including a 2-hour, 13-minute time on Tuesday. How do you balance pushing on the pace on these sort of still easier days while recovering from the bigger efforts?
I think for me, the key is to just use perceived effort for the most part. You and I have talked a lot about heart rate versus, you know, RPE, which is Actually, I don't even, what does the R stand for? Something perceived effort.
Relative perceived
Relative
effort,
perceived effort. There we go. Yeah. So I
because it's
really like
relative to
using,
your own effort.
yeah, exactly. I really like using that on my easy days. I will check my heart rate sometimes, but a lot of the time, the heart rate on my easy days is more something I look at afterwards to just see, oh, what was my heart rate compared to the time? I often don't look at it during the easy run itself. So I just kind of go by feel. And at this point, especially when it's this kind of training block where I'm doing almost the same route almost every single day. I know really well what my body should feel like at different points on that route, and even just how engaged my mind is. Is my mind wandering? Am I focused? Am I enjoying listening to a podcast? Whatever it is, I kind of have little clues for myself that tell me how it's feeling. And I just think when you do it long enough, you have a good sense of, am I pushing right now, or am I just kind of going in neutral? I don't know, maybe neutral is not the right word, but am I just cruising? And that's really what I'm going for on those CC days is I never want to be pushing. I always just want to kind of be going. And so, yeah, that's always why the easy days are interesting to look at, because it's nice to see how quickly you can go when you're just keeping it really calm and chill and the perceived effort is low. That's a really good indicator, is when those days start to inch up the speed a little bit without actually your RPE, your relative perceived effort, or your heart rate increasing. I think that's a really good sign.
Okay. So on Thursday in particular, your workout looked really good. This was a tough workout, 7-minute intervals with only 1 minute rest in between.
Mhm.
And according to your notes, completing all of the work effort in 49 minutes and 7 seconds. You mentioned at the end of that it's hard to see where you're going to cut another 30 to 60 seconds off of this time. So how do you think about that and just maintain faith in the process when gains are asymptotic, we would say mathematically, but let's say you're just so close to the limits of performance that that's kind of what probably comes to your head as well. I don't see how it can get much better than this.
So for context, again, all these workouts are done on the same exact trail. And so when I'm doing these, 5, 6, 7, and next will be 8, 9, 10-minute intervals with a minute recovery, the minute recovery is standing. And so the quote unquote work that we're talking about is the exact same distance every single week. Excuse me. And so that makes it really nice and comparable. So I can look at both what is my best time ever for that segment, just running straight with no rest. And I can look at from week to week, okay, despite the various different intervals that I'm doing, the work itself, what is that time, and is that getting quicker? Because usually I've found that those longer intervals get pretty quick to, or excuse me, pretty close to what I can actually run for the whole segment if I'm a little bit fresh and really push and treat it kind of like a race. The record itself that I did last, or this previous March, right before I left for Everest in the spring, was 48:40, I think. So this is where I'm talking about, okay, where does that, 60 seconds or 30 seconds come from? I would love to give that another squeeze. And to me, even, 10 seconds under that would be great. Every single season, in the last 3 seasons, I've been able to bring it down a little bit from, over 50
I
minutes
see.
to, I think it was 49:40, and then 49:20, and then 48:40. So it's just keep clicking down bit by bit. You know, it is funny because, yeah, you go out and do 7-minute intervals with rest, and it still feels really hard. And it's like, man, 30 seconds, 60 seconds is a lot. Like, where does that come from? Like, I look at all of those 7-minute reps and it's like, okay, could I have been 20 seconds faster in this piece, or 5 seconds faster? I don't know. Like, it's hard to see it, but then also for me, at least, I know I've done it before and I know it's possible. And so that part is a nice reminder to just it forces you to trust the training process. And I think one of the things that I've joked about with some of the athletes I coach, like Connor, is, there's this funny thing that training, we almost like forget that it works sometimes. And you'll be at the start of a season, or even a month or two out from a big competition, and it'll just feel like totally impossible what you're trying to do. And then if you just keep doing the training and you're consistent, and week by week by week, you'll see little marginal gains, and then those little marginal gains add up, right? It's like compounding interest, that it get if you improve a couple seconds every week, or a couple, even a percent every week, that eventually adds up to pretty significant gains over the course of months. It's yeah, it's definitely a funny thing, because it can be really hard in the moment to be like, oh my God, there's no way I can run a minute faster than that and not take any rest, when I took, what would have been, I think I took 6 minutes of rest. And so I'm not going to take any rest and then I'm going to run a minute faster. That's not possible, but maybe it will be. We'll see.
Well, in this case, you do know you've done it before, so that helps a lot. Right? So you know you're capable of it. It's
Yep.
just a matter of, are you capable of it in this particular season?
Exactly.
Okay, yep. Go ahead. Were you going to say something?
I was going to add, like, and the other part of that is even if I hadn't done it myself on this one, that you can kind of interpolate a little bit from other things. So, let's say I was in a different place on a different trail that takes about, 50 minutes. I can kind of use the data that I've gathered on the Polichosky and say, okay, I know that if I can do, 5 times 10 minutes with 5 minutes of rest up this climb, then that work time for the 15 minutes will be about what I can do in an all out effort. So then I can kind of use that as a benchmark and say, okay, if I want to break this other record that's about 50 minutes, if I can go do 5 times 10 minutes and those 10-minute chunks add up to what I need to do, then I can use that. So there's ways that we can use our training data that can be really, really helpful in that way that we can, take from one place, and if the conditions are kind of similar and it's a similar setup, we can use it somewhere else. So the more that
Hmm.
we train, the more that we look at our own history and data, the more that we can use that to plan and figure other stuff out in the future.
Okay. Yep. Pay attention to the data.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, on Thursday afternoon, you cut your workout short. You had planned to do 20 intervals. You cut it short at 8 because, in the words of your training log, you could tell your body just wasn't ready for it. So, talk us through that workout and how you knew and what made you make that call.
The idea was just to do something a little bit quicker. This is the same day as that 7-minute reps in the afternoon. And I went into it just feeling tired. Like, I just felt literally sleepy, which is not usual for me. Usually on these workout days, I'm super excited and I'm amped and I'm ready to go. And I just didn't really feel like it. I didn't feel like myself. And I think the morning workout was hard, and at the end of the block, I just didn't feel like getting into a hole. And so I got there and did my warm up and kind of let it go and see, okay, let's see how the body feels. And the afternoon workouts for me are very much the secondary emphasis of the week. The morning workouts are the more important ones. So I really wanted to go into that as just, okay, let's make sure that this makes sense. Let's take it easy and not get ourselves into a big hole before the weekend where I had this, big, huge overnight thing on Koto planned. So that was really the mindset going into it was, if anything, I'm happy to settle for a C plus, not even a B plus in this afternoon session. And that was pretty much what all that happened. I got on the treadmill and I was doing some uphill reps and I was just like, yeah, this really doesn't feel that good. I didn't feel smooth. My head wasn't really into it. Felt like I was pushing too hard, and it was just a judgment call in the moment, literally. And then I got to like 6 reps and I was like, yeah, there's no way I'm going to do 20 of these. This is going to be way too hard. Or I would just have to slow down so much that the stimulus wouldn't be what I wanted it to be. And so I decided, okay, I'm just going to do 2 more of these and we'll call it an 8. That's a nice number. And yeah, it was a good idea because then I was really, really tired. I skipped my lift that day too. Just, I could tell muscularly I was a little bit fatigued, and it was the right call. I just, came home, got on the bike, did a little shakeout, and then, relaxed the rest of the day and felt pretty good the rest of the week. So
Uh-huh.
I think sometimes that's the right call. And for me, like personally, knowing myself really well, I know that if I'm on the fence about whether to do something or not, it's almost always better to not do it because I'm generally overly motivated, like to a fault, if anything. And it takes a lot for me to even consider cutting things short. That's the kind of side of the line that I've tried to stay on, especially, this season and even I would say in the last couple seasons.
Yes, I would say, having done these podcasts with you and been, at least vicariously involved in your training for a few years now, I would agree. I don't know the right word to use, maturity or judgment or whatever you want, is substantially improved. And you just described it quite accurately that, oh, well, I knew I had this other really important thing coming up, even just the morning is more important than the afternoon, just being able to understand strategically, these are the really important times that I need to concentrate on. And you know what? If I'm not really feeling great in this other in between time, that's fine. Just let it go and don't worry about it. So I think that is
Yep.
important and a good lesson for people in general training is, you have to think about where the rhythms of your training are and what's really important, and don't overtrain, because that is 90% of the reason. I'm probably exaggerating, but let's say a lot of the reason people end up with with injuries. A lot of
Yep.
it is repetitive injury from overtraining. And
Definitely.
if you want to run a big race or something, keep your eyes on the prize, as we say. Make sure you're doing the
Yep.
right things and not overdoing things that are helpful but not that important at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Okay, well, speaking of Koto, which is short for Cotopaxi, the very big volcano very near Quito in Ecuador, let's talk about Cotopaxi because that was the
Yep.
overnight expedition you were planning to run all night, was the centerpiece of the week. You were planning to start at 8 p.m. on Saturday and go for 10 hours or so. Beyond just the basic numbers, what was your strategy for this session? What did you want to get out of it? And how did it differ from your previous sessions on big workouts, which were these long hypoxic sessions on the treadmill or the bike?
I did a workout very similar to this in the spring. It was actually the first big thing that I did with Ryan Hall when he came to visit was we went out to Koto and basically, yeah, I was doing all these laps up and down, actually the lower part of the mountain that day because the glacier was a little bit unstable, so it wasn't quite safe enough to go up. But the idea was twofold, I think, maybe even threefold. One was, like you said, just it was another long workout, which I think these long sessions are important when we're preparing for something really long, which, going up Everest is long. It's going to be a, certainly 10 plus hour, if not 20-hour effort, probably more like 24 hours round trip. It's going to be a very, very long day. So we want some really long days in there to prepare. So that's similar to what we've been doing on the treadmill. That's kind of bucket number one. Bucket number two is the fact that it's overnight. That's not by accident. Overnight stuff is really hard, and it's not something that I have a ton of experience with. And things are really different at night. Night is colder, it's dark, you can't see as well. Your circadian rhythms are off. Everything is just like a little bit spookier and scarier, I find. And like I'm someone who really likes their sleep, so I don't stay up super late and do a lot of late night stuff. So this is that was another really big part of it. So that's bucket two, is that it's night. And then the third is it's really a dress rehearsal because this is the first time probably since I left Nepal, since I left Everest, that I did anything on snow. So I'm using boots, I'm using crampons, I'm using an ice axe, I'm using, little summit bag. And it's really a dress rehearsal for all of the actual gear and technique that I'm going to have to use while climbing Everest. So that's kind of the third thing. So it's long stimulus, long workout, overnight, and gear. All three of those things in one workout, which for me is great because I can practice a lot of different things and get a lot out of this one session.
Okay. And so you did it and you completed, was it 4 round trip
Yep.
ascents? Completed 4 round trip ascents of Cotopaxi, which again blows my mind. It's a 20,000 foot volcano, so we're not talking
Almost.
about a
It's
walk in the park.
19,350 feet or something.
Oh,
So
okay.
almost
Excuse me.
20,000.
19,300 feet.
Yep.
Something like 3,400 meters of
Yep.
vert. So how was it for you? And talk us through what you felt both mentally and physically and how you responded to that as the night progressed into morning.
Yeah, overall, I'd say it went really, really well. I think the biggest, well, I guess let's talk through those three buckets, right? So we had long stimulus, nighttime, and gear. Long stimulus wise, I thought it went really well. Energy wise, I felt good the whole night. I did a really good job of kind of balancing my like adrenaline and caffeine, and I actually never felt tired, which is interesting because I literally did not go to sleep at all. I've had overnights in the Himalaya, for example, or races where they start at like midnight or something like that. And you can kind of trick yourself into maybe going to bed at 5 p.m. and getting a few hours of sleep. And sometimes I find that difference is pretty significant of even getting a few hours of sleep and then waking up and like recaffeinating and having breakfast and going out. But this like, just because of the way that the days were laid out, I was going with a friend of mine and a mountain guide who was going to be climbing with her. And so we like left keto in the afternoon. We got there in the afternoon. I basically had dinner, got all my stuff organized, and then just went up the mountain. So it was a true all-nighter in the sense of like, going back to college of staying up all night studying or something. So the overnight part went really well. Excuse me, the fitness part, I guess that's also the overnight part. That part went really well. The third bucket, which was the gear bucket, which or like kind of dress rehearsal, that I think was the one that needed the most help, which makes sense because it's the one that I've touched the least in practice leading up to this. And I think we'll talk more about that as we go on, but I think that was the one where I definitely just felt like the most out of my element. I felt like I was relearning some stuff that I'd learned in the spring, just various things that yeah, we'll get into that. But so overall, I'd say, the purpose of this session for me was to get a training stimulus, but also to learn a lot about what I need to fix. And now, I still have probably 8 weeks to do that. And I'll have another one of these all-nighters. Once I get to Nepal, I'll do it on Mera Peak and Kare before I go. So I have another opportunity to kind of practice all this and see how that stuff is going before I actually go to Everest. So in that sense, it went really well. In the moment, it was a little bit frustrating because I was dealing with a lot of little things that were not going that great, especially with just like fuel and literally like being able to get at my stuff. It was a really cold night, so I was having trouble with my hands, things like that. But those are I wouldn't expect everything to go perfectly the very first time, when I haven't been on
Mhm.
a high
Yep.
mountain in almost 2 months. So I'd say overall, the lessons learned were really good. I did a good job this morning once I'd gotten a good night of sleep of just brain dumping all of my thoughts out and making a list of, okay, here's all the things that didn't go well. Here's what I'm going to do about them. And yeah, no, we'll talk through those over the next couple of questions, it looks like.
Okay. And in a classic case, as a parent of, well, I'm glad we didn't know that till after you got back. Early in your ascent, in the first ascent, in fact, so early on in the night, early on in your first ascent, you got disoriented and found yourself on the edge of a large crevasse. How did you handle that moment of real danger? And what did it teach you about solo navigation, being alone on a big mountain like that?
I had again, this was my first time on a glacier in a minute, so probably yeah, over 2 months now, and there definitely is some getting used to that again of just keeping your head in the right space. And this was a moment where it was like the very first time I was going up the hill, and mostly Cotopaxi has a really clear boot path. It's like a sidewalk basically the whole way up. It's really obvious, but at the beginning the snow is really hard and compact down where it's just the very bottom of the glacier. And there'd been a little tiny dusting of snow in the afternoon, so there wasn't much, and I was just kind of going off of the general direction of where I knew it went. And so I just got a little bit too high above the route and found myself. I think I actually noticed it because I kind of punched through the snow with my pole in one hand and an ice axe in the other. And I was like, oh, shoot, yeah, that's a pretty big hole right there. And again, this is another thing in the dark. It's literally just harder to see these things. Like when I came down the mountain in the morning and it was light out, it was incredibly obvious. You could see the trail like from 300 meters below from the Refugio, like where to go. It was super obvious. And this is actually one of my notes to self is like, hey, if you get disoriented, I keep my headlamp on a really low setting so it lasts all night. Like if you get really disoriented, just turn the headlamp on brighter. And that makes a really big difference because suddenly you can see little tiny footprints or crampon marks in the snow, things that you might not have noticed with the headlamp on low. And so that would have definitely avoided this entirely. But honestly, in this moment, I think I was most proud of I did a really good job, I think, of staying calm and recognizing, okay, I'm not in the right place. I'm not in a dangerous place like where I was. I was safe in that moment, but it's also like if I took like 2 more steps, I was going to probably fall into this crevasse. So don't do that. But I was in a completely safe place and I realized it before it became a problem. And I was in that moment, I could have stayed there indefinitely, right? Like I wasn't going to fall or anything. It's like, okay, don't panic because this is not a dangerous situation right now. You're fine. Now let's look around, turn your headlamp on brighter. Oh, there's the trail. It's right over there. I see all these footprints. I'm just like, whatever it was, 5 or 10 meters uphill of it. So now I just need to carefully avoid this crevasse and walk downhill to the trail. And then it's, yellow brick road all the way to the summit. So I think that was a moment for me that was really good because it showed me that I have the skill set to solve these problems and recognize when a problem is happening, but also that I didn't get completely freaked out. I didn't see like a huge heart rate spike or anything like that. I was just, okay, let's figure this out. Let's problem solve. Let's get back on the trail. Okay, now we're there and everything is fine. And then let's keep going. So yeah, it maybe I wrote it and it sounded scarier than it was. It was definitely not a great situation or it could have been worse, I guess, if I, walked another 2 steps or something. But I think this is for me a sign of experience and just having that knowledge and yeah, the experience of the last few years of spending a lot of times in the mountains and recognizing when something doesn't feel right and then how to quickly problem solve that.
But you don't know. So here's an interesting question. So said, okay, well, turn your headlight on if you get disoriented, but you didn't know you were disoriented until you were almost in the crevasse. Do I understand that right?
Well, but if I had turned my headlamp on as soon as I hit the snow, like on really bright, I probably would have been a lot easier.
But what would have made you turn your headlight on as
Because there
soon
were no
as you hit the
footprints.
snow?
I couldn't see anything.
You
And so
should have. So
instead,
that's
I
the
just kind of
learning
relied
is,
on my,
okay.
yeah,
Yep.
I should have just turned my headlamp on really bright as soon as I put my
Yep.
crampons on and got on the edge of the glacier. But I knew like, I also had a GPX track from a friend who had gone up the mountain a couple of weeks ago. So I was like, oh, I've
Uh-huh.
got the GPX track and I know it basically just goes straight up and then it bangs a right. So I'm going to run into that right-hand turn at some point. The problem
Mhm.
was I got like too far left and above. And so I missed the right-hand turn. That was what happened. But
Okay.
if I had just been a little bit more cautious and just turned that like super bright spotlight on, I would have been able to
Yep.
see that trail where it turns right from the beginning. And I would have known, oh,
Uh-huh.
if I just angle a little bit to the right, I'm going to cut the corner and I'm going to run right into it. It's going to be like crossing a highway,
And let me ask a further question then along this line. So why don't you just take extra batteries or another headlamp? Is the
Oh, I
weight
did.
that significant?
I did. I have backups. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a backup
So is it
headlamp and
still
backup
not enough
batteries.
to keep is it still not enough to keep the light on all the time?
The really bright setting, probably not. It's an experiment thing. I could probably keep it on like the middle setting. That was honestly one of the things I wanted to see.
Yeah. Yeah, it just makes sense that if you could keep it on the highest setting, even throw it, I don't know, there's the weight trade-off, right? Of
Yeah.
carrying either batteries or other headlamps
Yep. It's not a
versus
huge
being
amount of
able to
extra
have
weight.
bright light.
It's honestly it's almost more of like the hassle of changing the battery, especially when it's super cold and you have really cold fingers.
Can you just take an extra headlamp instead?
Sure, could do that. Yeah.
It might make sense because even just in terms of alertness, if you're in bright light and there's brighter light around you, you just, circadian rhythms, right? You can fight a little bit of those circadian rhythms.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I had almost thought about it the other way of I almost kind of like it being almost like a smaller world and just all you see is like the 1 meter in front of you. It's sometimes it's better not to see too
Yep.
far
There's a there's
because
a
it's
there's
less scary.
trade-offs, and one option is to say, your default is bright rather than your default is dim, especially when you start. And then if
Mhm.
you're settled into a trail that you know very well, then you can do that, narrow the world, because
Yeah,
the other side of it physiologically is the fatigue on your eyes is a little bit lower if, the light is comparable to the background. So in the
sure.
dark, you don't need as much light, right?
Yeah,
But this is a weird situation. There's not many people
yeah.
running up a glacier in the dark. And
And the
so the trade-off of having better visibility through brighter light, at least at the beginning, I would suggest might make some sense.
yeah. The other
And
thing
then you can
about the
turn it
Everest
down.
route versus this route, though, is like we literally have fixed lines pretty much the entire way. So the disorientation following the trail is a lot less of an issue because
Fixed
you've
lines,
got
meaning there are ropes and things you
meaning
can
the
see.
ropes, yeah. So
Yeah.
you literally can just follow the rope almost the entire way up the mountain. So there's very, very
Uh-huh.
little actual route finding.
Okay.
But yeah,
Okay.
it's an interesting thought. Yeah, more experimenting. It's one of the things we'll talk
Okay.
about in the cool down of like why I want to do more overnights.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you mentioned it off and on, but let's bring it up explicitly. The nutritional challenges that you ran into were significant. Your water bottles froze. You put off from time to time eating because of the difficulties with the cold and getting access to things. And ultimately, you ended up with some stomach problems. How much of this do you think was just the cold versus the sustained effort, or was it some combination, or were there other things involved?
I think it was definitely just the cold and being out on more exposed terrain. I've had multiple really good workouts of, I think it was like 6 and 8 hours or something on the treadmills where getting down that amount of calories was not an issue. So I don't think it was anything to do, like the effort was very similar to those, like in terms of heart rate, in terms of perceived exertion, all that. So I think it was really just, yeah, I didn't do a good job of forcing myself to really take the timer seriously and say, okay, it's 30 minutes. Okay, it's time to eat. It's 60 minutes. Okay, it's time to eat. I was negotiating with myself in the moment because it was really chilly. It was windy. It was cold. I'd say this piece of the route is really exposed to the wind. I don't want to stop here for even 30 seconds. I need to keep moving. So I'm going to keep going. And the other thing I found was, like I said, because I was soloing on this route that usually you would climb with a partner and you're roped together, because I was soloing and I wanted to be safer, I had an ice axe in one hand and a pole in the other pretty much all the time. So both my hands had stuff in them. And so, especially if I'm on a steeper, more exposed piece of the route, the last thing I want to do is now, let go of one of those things and now try to like navigate unzipping my pocket and grabbing something out of my
Yeah.
pocket with one hand, which has a mitten on it, by the way, because it's freezing and I don't want to take that off either. And then opening a gel with my teeth and taking it like all on precariously balanced with like one little point holding me onto the mountain. So I would often like wait until I'm on a little flatter, less exposed piece. So there were a bunch of different things that were very specific to the gear and being on the mountain in this climate. That said, it's very possible it's way colder than this on Everest. So that's a serious problem that we have to solve. And I think I've brainstormed that a little bit and thought about what we can do differently and have some ideas. But yeah, I mean, I think the frozen bottles and I knew this from before, I just forgot about it, is the bottle vest has to be on the inside. So you have base layer and then bottle vest over that and then coat jacket layers over that so that the bottles don't freeze. I just
So your
didn't do that
body
because I'm
heat
an idiot.
keeps the, yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
The body heat and the outer layers keep the bottles from freezing. But I mean, yeah, I think I drank less than probably 200 milliliters, like less than a half liter the entire night. And I think
Wow.
that also
Yeah.
probably contributed to stomach issues was I didn't have enough liquid I was too dehydrated to digest well. And that started giving me a little bit of an upset stomach. So,
Hmm.
it's good to know, okay, you can survive for 12 hours on almost no water, but also it's like, it didn't go super well from that fueling side. So that's definitely something that needs to be figured out. Yeah.
Yep. And on Everest, will you be in that situation of having an ice pick in one hand and an axe in the
No,
other a lot?
definitely not. No. So I would have, one hand will pretty much always either be on the Jumar, which is the like vertical ascender that you clip onto the fixed line, or else I'll just be, using that hand free to clip, short safety rope with a carabiner on the end onto that safety line. And then I would either have both hands free, or maybe sometimes I actually have like a pole in one hand for like a steeper piece and the Jumar in the other. But it's much, much easier and safer because, if I'm in the Lhotse face, which is the steeper part of the route there, that's, 40 to 60 degrees, even if I'm paused on a 60-degree slope, if I'm clipped up onto the rope, especially with my Jumar, which is essentially a ratchet, like I can lean back on that and all my weight is on the rope. So I can lean back on that. Now I have both my hands and I'm just held on by my harness and I can use my hands to do whatever I want. So I think it's actually
Okay.
much easier in that. I think this was something that was more specific to being solo up there on this mountain.
Yep. And you got to figure, so then you just have to figure out how to deal with your hands and getting the
Yeah, then the
food
hands. I think
out and
I
into your mouth.
Yeah, I need a good liner glove, which I've been looking at, like a really thin but
Right.
decently warm little wool glove that you can wear under a mitten.
Right.
So then you can have, if you're really high, like over 8,000, you have these huge mittens that I have from this company called Lens that are actually electrically heated. So
Yep.
those are great, but then you can have the light glove on under it. So you can take those off for 30, 60 seconds, pull your gel out, boom, slam it, put the mitten back on, and you're going. Yeah.
Yep. Hmm. And you can get those mittens on and off relatively easily, the big
Yeah,
mittens.
yeah, those slide right. Yeah, that's easy. And they're like
Okay.
the kind that are kind of circle, what do you call it? Like, there's like a little tie almost that goes onto your wrist. So you can just
Yep.
pull it off and it just hangs and then you put it back on so you don't have to worry about it sliding down the
Yep.
mountain by accident.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. The other big issue you had was blisters.
Yeah.
You had blisters on your feet, and these really became a limiting factor. In fact, I think you cut it one ascent short or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd thought about doing
Because,
5 and the blisters were, yeah, I didn't want to have
yeah,
it become a situation where it's like, okay, I'm gonna lose a week of training because I can barely walk or something because my feet are so torn up. So
yep. So
today
was
they
this
feel pretty good. Yeah.
good? So was this so what was the problem? Gear problem, conditioning issue, 10 hours just, running around the world and running up and down a mountain in mountain boots? Do you know?
Probably a little bit of all those. I think when you do something really long, it's pretty likely that something weird is going to happen with your body. We just don't do 10-plus hour days in training very long because they're really hard on the body. And so you can only condition yourself so much. I mean, my feet are basically made of shoe leather. They're like hobbit feet, as you know, and like they have been for a long time. I think it was kind of a perfect storm. One was because this was a up and down day. Obviously I had to go up and down the mountain. There's no cable car on Cotopaxi. That was a new stimulus. So luckily, muscularly and joint wise, my body felt completely fine with that much downhill. All the other really long days I've done so far, I've been on the treadmill or Stairmaster, so that's only uphill.
Yeah.
So this is by
Yeah.
far the longest. Well, let me say this a different way. It was by far the most downhill I've done in a single day in like probably since Everest. The other was yeah, I was wearing the mountain boots the whole time, and I think they're great. I'm not trying to throw Sportive under the bus, and I'll also be honest. I think they're mountain boots. Like they're not as comfortable as running shoes. So I think that combined with the socks I was wearing, which is the Lens heated socks, which is what I'll wear in Everest, which again is not the same sock I wear every day. And then the fact that it had a lot more downhill, it was really only the downhill where this became an issue. So I actually want to put them back on once I've let my feet heal a little bit and kind of try and figure out exactly where that rubbing is happening and figure out if it's possible to add a little bit of padding, or even just because I've actually had blisters in this exact same spot with this boot before. And so I wonder if it's just the way that the boot is shaped and the way that my foot is shaped. And it was the same thing. It was on the downhill. This was like last year on Aconcagua. I had this happen when I was guiding, and it was a really, really long, slow descent. So I wonder if it's just something about, yeah, the shape of my foot and inside the shoe. And I almost wonder if just preemptively putting some, what's it called, second skin or literal duct tape or something
Moleskin.
on that spot, just to have it preemptively
Yeah.
protected, if that would do the trick. Because it's not that big of a deal if it's on the downhill, because for me, all the downhill will be on the way down after Everest.
Right.
Here, it was
Right.
more annoying because it was, I was going up and then down and then up and then down. And so every
Right.
time it got a little bit worse. But also, it would be really nice to not like have my feet completely shredded at the end of the day. It's definitely something I'd like to work on.
Yeah, it'd be
But
good to be able to get down, even if you're successful in getting all the way up without destroying your feet in the process.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm sure while you're not trying to, go down at the same rate you're going up, because the record is really the vertical record up, the
exactly.
faster you can get down, the better.
Yeah,
So, okay. Yeah. The small everyday problems of complicated
I know.
mountaineering,
Yeah,
blisters, which actually, are a problem for every athlete everywhere. I mean,
yeah,
blisters are one of the biggest problems in general athletics.
yeah,
So many, I remember famous basketball players like Larry Bird and even Michael Jordan sometimes almost having to sit out games because of blisters.
yeah.
So yeah, it's a real issue. Okay, but despite all this and all these challenges that you ran into, you did say, and you said it here earlier, you said it in your notes, you were never feeling tired or scared during the entire night. So what does that tell you in general about your current fitness and about both physically and mentally your fitness heading towards Everest?
I think that the idea of fear and kind of mental preparedness, it's something I've been focusing a lot on this block. And I think there are two different things two sides of the coin here, maybe. The first is that I think experience makes things a lot less scary. We talked about this a little bit before with the idea of when I encounter that crevasse and just recognizing the situation, being able to stay calm. Part of that is through experience and just knowing what to expect and having dealt with other situations and seeing what's really dangerous and what is not. So the fact that nothing really felt scary was really good, because I've had a lot of experience on Cotopaxi. It was the very first big mountain I ever climbed back in 2008. What is it? Oh my gosh, that's 17 years ago. Thank goodness, that's a long
It
time ago.
is.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
17 years ago was the very first mountain I ever climbed, like real mountain, I'd say, snowy mountain with crampons and stuff. And I remember feeling like the hardest thing I'd ever done, and it took me probably like 8 hours to go up and down once or something. And then I was, the first big mountain that I kind of soloed and did a speed record on, and that was 5 years ago or so. And I remember that also feeling really scary of, going up onto that glacier the first time by myself, without a partner, without a rope, moving quickly. All that stuff was so new, and it was so, outside the norm of what was done, especially on that mountain, that it was pretty intimidating. And I think being able to go up there, and especially not having been on a glaciated peak in a couple months, it was a really positive experience of, oh yeah, this is kind of like riding a bike now. I haven't done it in a couple months, but it feels fine. I get up there, I get into the rhythm, I've got my gear on, and everything feels really good. And yeah, I think a lot of that just comes from the experience of having done it so much. The other side of that coin that I mentioned, so the one side is experience. The other side, I think, is really intentional practice. And that's something that I've been trying to do much more of. I've talked to one of our family members, actually, Donna, about kind of how to deal with fear and some CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy kind of things, and visualization and stuff like that. And so I've actually been doing that even on some of those last hypoxic workouts on the treadmill. I would literally spend part of those workouts watching videos of like POV footage in the ice fall to like practice being there
Hmm.
and being in that moment
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
trying to feel the same sensations as I did, because we've talked about this before, I think, but one thing I noticed is my heart rate would be so high in the ice fall, and you just can't have that. You can't have like the first 2 hours of a 20-hour day be at tempo effort. Like that's not going to end well. It's too high of an energy system. So I really have been trying to focus on being in places that are scary, visualizing that, and trying to control my breathing, control my heart rate, And I think I did a good job of that on Saturday night because yeah, it can be a little bit spooky up there, especially I'm the only person on the mountain at those in those first probably 3 or 4 hours because most of the groups don't leave until about midnight. So, no one else is there. There's no one to help you. And, Cotopaxi in some ways is there's no ropes on the mountain. There's nothing there. Like it's a more solitary experience, if anything. And I think that was a really, really positive practice for me of being able to be there, be present, and control those sensations and not have it really negatively impact me at all during the whole night. Yeah, like you said, I felt pretty calm, pretty steady all night. I never felt tired, never felt scared.
Hmm. Great, great. So let me ask you one more question. Did you do any of the intentional breathing? Is this not high enough altitude to make it make sense, or did you try any of the intentional breathing that you had been doing in your hypoxic efforts on the
I
bike?
did, and I realized that one of the reasons it's really hard to test this in the field is because when you're on the treadmill or the Stairmaster on the bike, it's really easy to keep the energy output exactly the same. So it's really
Hmm.
easy to tell that the breathing is the thing that's impacting the heart rate, right?
Right.
On the
Hmm.
mountain, it's really, really hard to do that. It's really hard to say, okay, I'm doing this breathing and now my heart rate's dropping, but also maybe did I also slow down and I didn't notice? Or maybe the terrain got a little bit gentler and less steep and I didn't notice that. Or maybe it got the other way. So I did try to do that. And I did a lot of intentional breathing and my heart rate did stay in the right zone, I would say. But it was very hard for me to recreate that effect just because there wasn't any one time where I felt like, oh, this is, a perfect ramp and it's not the angle's not changing and I don't know
Yeah.
that my effort's not changing and things like that. So that
Yep.
that was I think why I kind of probably relearned this. I'm sure I figured it out last year as well, but yeah, it's really hard to recreate that because there's so many other factors that influence the heart rate when you're outside. When you're on a
Yep.
machine, you can just set it and okay, the wattage is exactly the same, the speed is exactly the same. And so if those things are the same and I change my breathing, my heart rate drops 10 beats, it's got to be that.
Yep. Hmm. Yeah. Okay. But that gives us, so maybe the lesson is that's why you do it in a fixed environment, because it shows you that there is some impact. So it's
That's a
worth
really good point.
at
Yep.
least attempting even when you're not in that fixed environment. And maybe you can't tell directly, but maybe it is having an impact.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay. So this was certainly your most Everest specific training session to date, where you were trying as much as you can, where you are to simulate the conditions you're going to run into. So what were the top takeaways for you that will influence your actual record attempt when you get up to Everest?
I think the number one thing takeaway wise for me is I need to figure out a really good way to make sure that I can feed myself 200 calories every 30 minutes, regardless of anything else. So no matter
Hmm.
how cold it is, no matter what terrain I'm on, whether there's wind or no wind, I need to be able to use my hands some way or another to put food into my mouth every 30 minutes. That's the
Hmm.
really big simple takeaway because if I can do that, everything else, the fitness is going to be fine. But if you don't do that, then it doesn't matter how fit you are. At some point, you're going to crater. That was, I'd say, the biggest struggle last or 2 nights ago. It was just feeding myself consistently. So there's definitely more
And
practice. I've
liquid too,
actually
is that part of the equation or just food?
some liquid. I know that I can get away with a lot less liquid. I can be more dehydrated than I can be underfueled.
And
So
liquid
that's
is
less
less of a
important.
problem as long as you don't let the bottles freeze. Is that right?
Exactly. So I think that problem is in pretty good shape because as long as my bottles don't freeze, I, knock on wood, fingers crossed, then that'll work. But yeah, the fuel, the carbohydrates is really, I know that my stomach can tolerate them, and I know that when I'm able to get those in regularly, I do really, really well for a really long time. And so that is the thing is, okay, I need to have options of what I can eat, and I need to have them in a way that's accessible for me that I can get them into my body every 30 minutes.
Hmm. Yep, that makes a lot of sense based on everything that happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, so let's wrap that up and tell us what you have coming up in the next week. So now you're on a slight break in
Yep.
between this training block and whatever comes next. So tell us what you're planning on for this recovery and what's coming up for the next 3 week block.
Yeah, recovery block, catching up on some work and hopefully just relaxing a little bit, taking a couple really, really light days today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. And then next 3 week block is my last 3 week block in keto, which is crazy. It feels like summer has flown by now. It feels like I just left Nepal like yesterday. But That is, yeah, it's my last 3 weeks here. And in terms of changes to training, like we talked about last time we talked about recovery blocks and next blocks, there's never big jumps. I think I'll have to look at my calendar. I think its last block was 3 hours time on feet a day. This one will be 3:15. So that's pretty insignificant. The bike will go from 75 minutes to 90 minutes. And then, the workouts will get a little bit harder. Like those 7-minute intervals will become 8-minute intervals next time. And that's kind of how you do it. It's just one little tiny baby step at a time. But otherwise, it's going to be a lot more of the same, a lot more time on Polychaski, more strength training, time in the gym, and mostly just trying to stay on the right side of that red line, trying to stay healthy, trying to not get too, in the hole, as we talked about earlier, and just keep getting those B+ days, stacking them up.
Okay, great. I'm out of questions. Anything else you want to add?
No, that's a good place. Let's wrap it, and we'll come back for our cool down.
Okay. And action on the cool down. So there's a new list added to the old list from your 16-item list that you created before your attempts to summit Mount Everest in record time in the spring. And so that's going to be the subject of our cool down here. So let's start by telling us, how did that start and what was the point of that list?
So the first list started, I remember I got a new notebook on the way back from Asia in the fall of 2024. So basically, right before I was starting the build up for the spring Everest season. And I wrote down, it's 16 because I just kind of kept thinking of things. It wasn't like a round number. And it was, I don't know, kind of like guidelines or principles. I don't know really what the word is for what all these things were, but they were kind of just things to remind myself of these are the principles, ideas that I want you, future Tyler, to be remembering, 3 or 4 months from now when you're in the middle of training or even on Everest itself. And some of them were things about how I wanted to train, things like keeping strength training in there and plyometrics, things like, maintaining high quality aerobic work once I got to Everest Base Camp. And some of them were much more kind of philosophical, I would say. The number one thing on that list, which we've talked about so many times, is don't get greedy, which I keep coming back to and is such a good training principle. And then obviously number 16, don't die, the one that people keep liking to bring up on social media. So that was the first list of 16. And yeah, the point, I literally had it taped on my mirror. I still do. And I brought it to Kare and had it taped on my wall in Kare. I would look at it like every day when I'm brushing my teeth. And it was a way of thinking, okay, like, am I doing all these things? Because I went into it with this idea of, okay, if I really stick to this list well, then I think that I can break this record on Everest. And that was where it all came from. And so I wanted to make sure that I was looking at it enough and thinking through every single thing on that list. Okay, am I doing this? Am I doing this? Am I doing this? And especially when it came to decision making, I could look at that list and think about, okay, is this going to put me at risk for injury? Is this being greedy? Is this sacrificing one of the things on this list that's really important to me? Things like that. So that was the idea with the original list, and this new 10-item list. Similarly, I think I wrote it in June, like early June, when I was coming back from Nepal, and it was the same idea. It was, okay, I think that there are probably a few more little tweaks I want to do, and these are the things that I want to remember. I don't think that there was anything on that 16-item that I didn't want to stick to, that I thought, oh, this wasn't that important. I think that those things were all really important, and these were, okay, these are, some additions that I think will make it even more likely that I'm successful in whenever it is the next time that I go to Everest. At that time, I thought it was going to be next spring, but then it turns out here we are, and it's now August, and I'm going back to Nepal next month to go back to Everest, and it's going to be a little bit sooner than we thought. So that was the idea with the list.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go through the new items then. So item number 1, more lower leg and ankle strength.
So this one came from literally just thinking about what did I feel acutely was the most sore or painful or limiting factor part of my body on the mountain itself. And this one and number 2 were that. So the number 1 was my lower legs and ankles. Obviously, my ankles have given me a lot of trouble over the last 10 years. I had Achilles surgery in my left ankle and had a lot of ankle and heel pain because of that. This, I think, was maybe related to that still. Could just be that there's some asymmetry and weakness on that side. But I think it was more just the stimulus of walking in crampons, like on front points, those 2 points on the front of the crampons on a steep slope. is something that's pretty hard to simulate other than just doing it. And you put a tremendous amount of force on your Achilles tendon, on your heels, on your lower legs when you're, think about like tiptoeing, but you're tiptoeing up a really steep ramp. That's basically what you're doing. It's so much strain and force on that part of the body. And so that was one of the big things I felt in terms of, I remember very specifically on some of those long days when I was attempting the route in the spring and just thinking like, okay, what is the thing in my body that feels worse right now? And it was almost always my lower legs. So that was the first thing I wrote down, and I've gone through it and written out a whole lower leg ankle strength plan, and I've been doing a lot of that, a lot more weighted
Yep.
stuff, a lot more endurance stuff as well. So it's that's a huge part of it.
Yep. I know from my over the years taking lessons in tennis and golf, the folks that I think are the best, that's one of the things they always talked about. Not enough lower leg training. Everybody focuses on core and focuses on thighs. But in fact, a lot of the reason that people get into trouble in most sports is they don't have strong enough ankles and they don't have strong enough calves. So
Yep,
makes a lot of sense. That's your foundation, right? Starting from the bottom. Okay,
exactly.
number two, more weighted pack training. So I guess this makes sense to me because we talked before about your need to carry more of your own stuff from time to time and getting used to just carrying that extra load.
This was the
Is
other
that
thing
what this
that
is about?
I felt, yeah. Yeah, well, it started out like I said before, this was the other part of my body that I felt got really sore was like my back and shoulders. And so
Hmm.
it really started from that and then kind of dovetails in, like you said, with this idea of being self-sufficient. So that was the idea with the weighted pack training. The last attempt that I did on the mountain, I actually used Chris Fisher's backpack because my stuff didn't fit into my little tiny Summit bag that I'd had custom made from FSP, which is a great bag, but I just it wasn't all going to fit in there. So that was the first time that I'd used a bigger backpack. And that day, it didn't go for a lot of reasons, but I think one of them was I was carrying too much weight and I was too tired. I wasn't strong enough. And so that was something that I wrote down as, yeah, I want to do more practice with the weighted pack and just use that as a way to both get my back and shoulders used to carrying more weight, literally, and the pressure that puts on
Hmm.
your torso, as well as using it as essentially more strength training and a way to get stronger.
Hmm. Okay. Number three was more overnights, which we talked about a
Yeah.
little bit in the regular session here. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I won't reiterate too much because this is all going to be part of the same episode. But essentially, overnight movement I think is just really different for a lot of reasons. Its circadian rhythms are different, and just being in the dark. We talked a bunch on the main episode about how and when to like allocate headlamp battery and how bright should your headlamp be and should it be bright or should it be dim and all these different things. But there's just something really different about being out at night and especially being out all night, which is what Everest is. We're talking about leaving at sunset, probably like leaving at 7, 8 o'clock at night, staying out all night and then being up probably all day the next day, and just being able to figure out what's going on with your circadian rhythms, being able to fuel well, being able to manage your energy and caffeine and all those things well to get through those low parts of the night. They're incredibly demanding. Like I felt so bad when I got back yesterday from my all-nighter. And so I don't want to do a ton of them, but I don't know that I did any entire all-nighters in my spring buildup. And right now I've got probably 3 on the calendar, which is about once a month. And I think that's appropriate because you learn a lot from one of those. And so I think 3 is going to be a good amount.
Okay. Number four, more walking in boots.
This is another one we kind of talked about in the main episode. It is actually a coincidence we're doing this week, but I got a bunch of blisters and I'm glad that happened yesterday and it didn't happen, the day before Everest or something. I remember going up the very first attempt and just thinking, oh my gosh, these boots feel so heavy because I've been in my little tiny Cyclone Sportiva running shoes, essentially, which for what it's worth, like I did go all the way to the top of Manaslu in those, but that was an exceptionally warm, lucky day. I'm not going to wear those to the top of Everest under any circumstances. And, the difference between a boot that weighs, 500 grams versus 800 grams versus a kilo is a really significant difference. And so just the weight of the shoe is something you want to get used to, but also the way that the shoe feels and the way the ground feels in the shoe and the mobility and how rigid these shoes are is very, very different from, a pretty, mobile, flexible shoe like the Cyclone versus even a very lightweight mountaineering boot like the Equilibrium Speed, which is what I wore up to 8450, and it's what I'm hoping to wear to the summit in October if the conditions are decent. So It's really it's about getting used to the shoe. It's about figuring out what it feels like, and then yeah, if there are hot spots, if there are blisters that are going to happen, making sure that we're preemptively preparing for those.
Hmm. Okay. Number five, figure out water.
This is a big crux in the spring, was trying to find out how to stay hydrated without either carrying an enormous amount of water or having to stop at a bunch of times, excuse me, having to stop a bunch of times at different camps and either melt snow or have people at those camps and have them have water ready for me, which is complicated and, kind of goes against our whole ethos of self-sufficiency. So this was one, yeah, I'm still not 100% sure that we have the answer for it, but it's something that in practice, one of the things we've been doing is just using less water and just practicing being dehydrated. And I think the other night on Cotopaxi, it was a good example of that line was probably too far on the dehydration side. I think, I only had half a liter in 11 hours or something, and it started to impact my ability to digest food, I think, and that's not good. But I think the water problem is a big one because you're either carrying a lot of weight or you're involving other people. Those are the only two options as far as I see them. Or you're spending a ton of time. I guess you could bring your own stove and melt water yourself, but I mean, it takes like half an hour to boil a liter of water at 8,000 meters. So like that's not really an option. So really yeah, you're carrying a lot of weight or you're relying on other people. And so we're still kind of in the process of figuring that one out, but it's really important.
Yep. Okay. Number six, 130 grams plus of protein per day.
This one, I'll give all the credit to Ryan Hall. He's become a little bit of a mentor to me on the strength side and some of the nutrition stuff as well. I think for me, protein intake has never really been a huge focus. I definitely did a little bit more in the spring. Maybe I was having 100 grams. I don't know, a little bit more supplementation. I was doing protein shakes after workouts and stuff like that. But he really pushed me. He said, dude, you need to be having at least a gram per pound of body weight. And I'm about 125 pounds. So 130 grams was he was like, that should be your minimum. And then it should be more on days where you work out hard, where you're doing intervals, where you're doing strength training. It should be 150, even 200, which for me is crazy. It's hard to hit those numbers without doing a lot of supplementation of protein powders and bars and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
honestly, I've seen good success. I mean, it's hard to know. The training is so multifaceted, but even in the last month of doing this, I just feel like my recovery has been really good. I feel like my strength has been really good. And so that's something I'm trying to stick to.
Okay. Yeah. I'm all for that. I think, I've been reading a lot of nutrition and health over the last few years, and there has been a lot of breakthrough real science about the amount of protein that's necessary. And people say, well, the recommended daily allowance in the United States, the RDA, is way below that. It's like point,
Yeah.
I can't remember what
It's
it
like a
is, but
pound
it's
per kilo, or excuse me, a gram per kilo, not a gram per
yeah.
pound.
So it's less than half,
Yeah.
something like that. But that, when you actually look at the history, that came about in World War II, and it was like starvation rate. That was for rations when there was
Really?
no food, basically.
Huh.
So yeah, that's what will keep you alive. That's the minimum protein you need to keep you alive. But particularly, and I became interested because I'm now, getting up there in age, as we say. And for elderly people, the number one problem is loss of muscle mass, which leads to falls, which leads to all sorts of problems. So
Sure.
that's the number one link to big problems in old age is literally loss of lean muscle mass. And now most of what I can say, and there's real science on this from some real protein experts about how much protein you can absorb. And people will say, oh, you can't absorb that much protein, which is BS. You can't actually absorb that much protein, particularly either because you're old like I am, in which case your mechanisms are not as efficient. What happens is your ability to get protein becomes less efficient. So you just need to take more in. So yes, it's
Hmm.
true. You can only get so much, but if your mechanisms for getting that protein become less efficient, you just need to take more because there's more
Yep.
waste. In your case, crushing your protein supply so much because of the amount of physical effort you do. So strength training, running, anything like that just takes a lot of extra protein to just basically keep up. And especially if you want to build muscle mass. Now, in your case, you have this trade-off where you want to build muscle mass, but you don't want to overbuild it because then it's just excess weight and you're not
Right.
trying to be a power lifter. But I think,
Yeah.
I think probably a good plan. I think Ryan probably is giving you very good advice there.
Yep.
Okay. Number seven, don't panic over one low week.
This one I wanted to remind myself that it doesn't have to be perfect, like the whole buildup, and it's pretty normal to have a week where I'm going to be sick or I'm going to have to travel and training is going to be garbage or whatever. I had that in the spring when I went to Switzerland for a week for the film. I got a little bit sick in Nepal as well, and just giving yourself the grace that like, hey, if you have a week that's shitty, it's not going to ruin your whole season. Like you still had a great season. And if I look at probably every season I've ever had in my life, there's probably one week that looks really bad on paper and where I was panicking. And it's better to not panic and just relax and say, okay, I'm gonna, it is what it is. Like if you have to take even a week off from training, it's not the end of the world if something is really wrong or if something comes up. So don't beat yourself up. It's the other, 15 of 16 weeks of the training block that are going to make a big difference. So it's about, not letting a simple thing become a multi-week problem. That's what we're really trying to avoid. But, having a week that's not perfect is not the end of the world.
Hmm. Okay, number 8, continue hypoxic training to 10 to 12,000 meters.
This was one that was new last spring. It was not on my list of 10 because I had never done it before. Excuse me, my original list of 16 because we'd never done it before. And I don't probably hadn't been at all done before, which was this idea of training hypoxia way above Everest summit altitude up to 11,000 meters was where I kind of plateaued last year once I got to Kara and EBC. I think it was really helpful, and I think that when I went to Makalu, it was kind of proof of concept for that I'd been going up to 6,000 every day for a couple of weeks in Kare, but then I was able to just go up to 8,000 whatever it was, 300 I think on Makalu, and had very minimal issues there at all in terms of altitude, no problem without oxygen, of course. So I think it was really effective. It's totally anecdotal. There's do as I say, not as I do. Like, don't try this at home. I think it could potentially help other people eventually, but I think it's something that would definitely want to be thought of as an experiment of one. And for most people, I've told the story a few times, we, had people who were already acclimated to like 5,000 meters in Kare put this mask on with oxygen coming out at a concentration of 11,000 meters altitude, which is about 35,000 feet, which is kind of like where airplanes fly at cruising altitude, like big jets. And yeah, all of them looked like they were about to die and pass out after about 45 seconds of that. It's no joke. Don't play around with this stuff. If you have one of these generators, don't just crank it up to 11,000 meters and see what happens. But for me, this goes back to the same idea of just a little bit by bit training that we were talking about at the end of the main episode is, just pushing it up 500, 1,000 meters every couple of weeks, no huge jumps. For me, it was very, very effective. And that's something that I want to keep doing this year.
Okay, number 9, no ego decisions.
No ego decisions to me means that I'm doing everything in pursuit of this one goal and what will prepare me best for that, which is going to Everest and setting the speed record. I think having, I go back and read my old logs quite a bit, which I find fun and enjoyable. And also I'm working on this book about Manaslu, and so I've been reading a lot about that. And there's so many times in my logs where I see myself going out and doing something just because I want to prove something to myself on that one day. And I think that's the difference between something that is ego driven versus something that's, I don't know, logic driven, I guess is maybe the other side of that is, okay, am I doing this because I want to satisfy my ego today, or am I doing this because it's going to help prepare me the best for Everest. And it's the thing that actually makes the most sense to do today. And sometimes those things do overlap. Sometimes it's, okay, I want to go break the Polichowski FKT again. Cool. That's definitely an ego decision. I care about that a lot. But at the same time, it all like if it makes sense in the context of my training, then it can be both. Right. So that's one where it could be both. Whereas, UTMB Quito just happened a couple days ago. I won that race last year. I have the course record. It's an awesome race. I was signed up to do it. I didn't do it. Part of that reason was it didn't make sense. It wasn't the best thing to do with my finite amount of training energy to prepare for Everest. I would love to have gone and done that race, but at the same time, it just the risk of getting hurt, and just the outlay of energy needed versus the return of what I would get in terms of preparation, to me, that math didn't line up. So that's an example of where, I think I'd made a non-ego based decision. I think if I had gone and run that race, it would have been because I really wanted to win the race. And is that cool? Is that fun? Is it good for your confidence? Sure. But does that outweigh, going to Cotopaxi and like the whole episode, like half the episode we spent talking about how much we learned on Cotopaxi? I think that was
Yep.
a much more
Yeah.
beneficial day for training for Everest.
Certainly makes a lot of sense. Okay, and number 10 and last, simplify, simplify, simplify.
This has kind of been the theme of, I'd say everything about this Everest project, basically since the third attempt of the spring, was there were too many cooks in the kitchen. We were trying to get too clever with things. And if we just stripped it all down and made it as simple as possible, the more that we can make it a fitness challenge and the less we make it a logistics challenge, the better it's going to go. Because I know that the fitness part is going to be there. I know that that's fine. The logistics are complicated, and that's where you bring in other people and more points of failure and all that. And so when we went into this season, we knew it was going to be a small team. We knew it was probably going to be maybe only one window, maybe two windows that we are going to have to work with because the fall has fewer good weather windows in general. So we wanted, okay, self-sufficiency, simple, everything simple. And so this is, kind of in the same way that don't get greedy was one of the big themes of last spring. And I think it's very much like don't get greedy is kind of like the theme my whole life, but simplify, I think, is very much the theme of my preparation as I think about getting ready for this attempt. And then especially as I think about the attempt itself and the few days leading up to it is, okay, if there's any kind of decision that we can make that makes things simpler, we should do that. And then just figure out how to make that happen, because that's the number one takeaway from the spring was just how big and complex of a project Everest was. And there's so many moving pieces. And if we can take away 10% of those moving pieces, it's, exponentially reduces the overall amount of complexity because all those pieces are interrelated. So it's removing not only that 10% of things, but it's removing this, big piece of a huge web where all these things are interconnected. So yeah, anytime we can make a decision, simplify.
Okay, makes sense. And then the last thing you wrote at the bottom was a single word, believe. So for those of us who watched Ted Lasso, it's, that was the thing, right? Was the little believe sign that he had over the door and the hilarity that ensued. But it was a terrific series because of the reality of the sincerity of the whole thing as well. So was that a Ted Lasso reference? Was there more to it? What made you write that last?
It definitely was a Ted Lasso reference. I think it was, let me step back. I think it's very easy to walk away from the spring season and feel really discouraged and look at how much preparation went into that, how specifically I had everything dialed. I got 3 different attempts on the mountain and I still didn't get it. And so it's easy to walk away from that and being like, man, that's not possible. I just can't do it, And maybe I'm Pollyanna-ish or too optimistic, but I walked away from that feeling like I was fit enough to do this. I can do this. It's still in my wheelhouse. I need the cards to fall a little bit differently. And I think that I can do even better. I think I can prepare better. I think I can handle my logistics better. And that was the mindset that I wanted to remind myself of, because it is really easy to get down on yourself and be like, oh man, that was so hard. I worked so hard for that and it didn't go. And like, why am I doing this again? Is it even going to work out? And when I remember flying back from Nepal and just thinking, yeah, I'm super bummed, but I also know that I can do this. And I really want to remind myself of that like every single day, is not just of the fact that I can do it, but of the fact that when I was closest to the mountain, to those experiences, that's when I was the most sure of it. And so that's the mindset that I want to bring forward and have every single day while I'm brushing my teeth and going to bed is, yeah, you remember, like you were sure you could do this. And that was when you were really close and you had just almost done it. You were so sure you could do it. And you need to have that faith because, that is a big part of athletics, is trusting yourself and really knowing that you have the ability to do something when you haven't done it yet. You have to have this kind of stupid faith that you'll be able to do it when it matters. And so that's what I was trying to remind myself.
Yeah, excellent. And I think you need that. All athletes need it. I think because the reality is, Tiger Woods won 14 major golf championships, but he played in over 40. And so even though he's considered one of the best who ever played the game and one of the most clutch players who ever played the game, it's really hard in the moment to still do it and to deliver. Everything has to go right. Everest is really hard. So I think, there's a difference between I know I can do it and getting it, everything to work right on that day. And it does take a lot of focus and a little bit of luck. So I think that's the right attitude. Okay.
Yep.
Well, that's a good list. Let's keep number 16 maybe as number 1 still as your father.
Yeah,
Anything
definitely.
else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I think that's all. I will read us out. So everybody, thanks as always for listening. Please send any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, hopes, dreams. You can send those to my email, ty@chosky.run, or DM me, Tyler C. Andrews, on Instagram. Remember, you can read my raw training logs on my blog at tylercandrews.com and also get that delivered via Substack. Ty's Training is a Chosky Media production brought to you by the good folks at Chosky, the world's leader and the only nonprofit foundation with online coaching, travel, and community for endurance. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Ciao.